He thought the difficult part was over. The flight had landed safely. His passport was valid. His ESTA approval had been granted. His hotel reservations were confirmed. Everything appeared perfect. And honestly, Daniel felt excited. This was his first trip to America, a dream vacation. Months of planning, months of saving, months of anticipation. Everything had finally become real. As the aircraft taxied toward the terminal, Daniel looked through the window. Bright airport lights stretched into the distance. Large aircraft stood parked beside the terminal. Ground crews moved quickly. Everything looked impressive. Everything felt exciting. Daniel smiled. This was the moment he had imagined for years. The seatbelt sign switched off. Passengers immediately stood up. Overhead compartments opened. Bags appeared. People rushed into the aisle. Everyone wanted to leave first. Daniel remained calm. There was no reason to rush. His vacation had only just begun. Or at least, that was what he believed. The airport terminal felt enormous. Crowds moved in every direction. Signs pointed toward immigration. Travelers followed the flow of people. Daniel joined the line, passport ready, documents prepared, everything organized carefully. The line moved slowly, very slowly. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The immigration area felt serious, quiet, professional, different from the rest of the airport. Officers sat behind counters. Travelers approached one by one. Questions were asked. Passports were scanned. Some travelers passed quickly, others remained longer. Daniel watched carefully, and honestly, he started feeling nervous. Not because he had done anything wrong, because immigration officers always seemed intimidating. Eventually, his turn arrived. He stepped forward. The officer took his passport, scanned it, looked at the screen, then looked at Daniel. The officer's face revealed nothing. No smile, no emotion, only professionalism. "What is the purpose of your visit?" The question sounded simple. "Tourism," Daniel answered confidently. The officer typed something. "How long will you stay?" 10 days. More typing followed. "Where are you staying?" Daniel provided the hotel information. The officer continued entering data. Everything appeared normal, routine, predictable. Then the officer asked another question. "Do you know anyone in the United States?" Daniel hesitated briefly. Not because he wanted to hide anything, because he was surprised. "A former university friend lives in Chicago." The officer nodded. More typing followed. The conversation felt longer than expected. Most travelers imagine immigration interviews lasting only seconds. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And Daniel was learning that reality. The officer reviewed the screen carefully, then asked another question. "What do you do for work?" Daniel explained. The officer listened, typed more information, then remained silent. Several uncomfortable seconds passed. The silence felt strange, very strange. Daniel suddenly became aware of everything around him, the sound of keyboards, the voices from nearby counters, the movement of travelers, the bright airport lighting. Everything seemed louder, everything seemed sharper. Then something unexpected happened. The officer stood up and walked away. Without explanation, without a word, without any indication of what was happening. Daniel remained standing, confused, uncertain, and honestly, slightly worried. Several minutes passed. The officer returned, sat down, reviewed the screen again, then asked another question. "What cities are you visiting?" Daniel explained his itinerary: New York, Washington, Boston. Everything had been planned carefully. The officer listened, nodded, and continued typing. Then came another pause, another uncomfortable silence, and, honestly, Daniel felt his heartbeat increasing. Most travelers never realize how quickly uncertainty creates stress, especially inside an immigration hall, because nobody tells you what they are thinking, nobody explains what is happening. You simply wait and hope. Then the officer looked directly at him. "And how much money are you carrying?" The question surprised Daniel, but he answered honestly. "Credit cards, some cash, bank accounts, everything legitimate, everything normal." Still, the officer continued reviewing information. And that was when Daniel first realized something. Approval did not mean certainty. Approval did not mean automatic entry. Approval simply meant the process continued. Many travelers never understand this distinction. until they experience it personally. The officer finally spoke again. "Please step to the side." Daniel froze, completely froze. For a moment, he believed he misunderstood. Maybe the officer was speaking to someone else, maybe another traveler. But no, the instruction was for him. Everything changed instantly. What happened next terrified him. He followed another officer into a separate area, away from the main immigration line, away from other tourists, away from the excitement of arrival. The room felt different, smaller, quieter, more serious. Several travelers sat waiting. Nobody looked relaxed. Nobody looked happy. Everyone appeared nervous. Daniel sat down. His passport remained with the officers, and honestly, that made him uncomfortable. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. Nobody explained anything. Nobody provided updates. Only waiting. Endless waiting. Most travelers fear the unknown more than bad news, because uncertainty allows the imagination to create worst-case scenarios. And Daniel's imagination was working overtime. Had he made a mistake? Was there a problem with his documents? Had someone stolen his identity? Was there an issue with his ESTA? Questions filled his mind. None had answers. Finally, an officer approached. "Please come with me." Daniel stood immediately. The officer guided him into a small interview room, a desk, 2 chairs, a computer, nothing more. The atmosphere felt serious, professional, and intimidating. The officer sat down, opened a file, and began asking questions. The same questions. Again. Travel plans, employment, hotel reservations, purpose of visit, everything repeated. Daniel answered calmly, honestly, directly. Yet the interview continued, longer than expected, much longer. Then something shocking happened. The officer pointed toward Daniel's phone and asked one simple question. "Is that your phone?" Daniel looked down. "Yes." The officer nodded, then asked another question. The question Daniel never expected. "May I see it?" Everything changed in one moment. His heartbeat increased immediately. Not because he had committed a crime, not because he was hiding something, because the request felt personal, very personal. Most travelers never expect immigration officers to ask about their phones. Yet in some situations, it happens. And honestly, Daniel had never considered that possibility. The officer waited calmly. The room became silent. The question remained hanging in the air. Daniel looked at the phone, then at the officer, then back at the phone. His vacation suddenly felt uncertain, his confidence disappeared, and his nightmare was only beginning. Part 2. The officer waited patiently. There was no pressure, no raised voice, no accusations, just a simple request. "May I see your phone?" Daniel's mind immediately started racing. Thousands of thoughts appeared at once. Why did they want his phone? What were they looking for? Had something gone wrong? Was he in trouble? Most travelers never imagine this situation. They prepare passports, they prepare visas, they prepare hotel reservations. But very few prepare for unexpected immigration questions. And honestly, Daniel felt completely unprepared. He slowly picked up the phone. The officer remained calm, professional, polite. There was no hostility, no aggression, just procedure. That made the situation feel even stranger. Daniel handed over the device. The officer placed it on the desk, then continued asking questions. Questions about his trip, questions about his itinerary, questions about his plans in America. Everything seemed connected. Every answer mattered. Every detail mattered. And honestly, that realization increased Daniel's anxiety. The officer reviewed hotel reservations, flight confirmations, travel plans. Everything appeared normal, at least initially. Then something unexpected happened. The officer asked about one specific city, Chicago, the city where Daniel's friend lived, a city he planned to visit briefly. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious, at least from Daniel's perspective. But immigration officers often look for consistency, consistency between statements, consistency between documents, consistency between travel plans. Everything must make sense. The officer asked another question. "When was the last time you spoke to your friend?" Daniel answered honestly, "A few weeks ago." The officer nodded, typed something, then continued. "What does he do for work?" Another simple question. Daniel answered. Everything still felt manageable. Then the officer looked at the phone and began reviewing information. The room suddenly felt smaller, much smaller. The silence became uncomfortable. Daniel watched every movement, every expression, every pause, trying to understand what was happening, trying to predict what would happen next. And honestly, he couldn't. Minutes passed. Long minutes, the kind that feel like hours. Most travelers never realize how slowly time moves during immigration inspections, especially when uncertainty takes control. Every second feels longer, every pause feels meaningful, every silence feels dangerous. The officer eventually looked up and asked another unexpected question. "Why did you book 3 different hotels before arrival?" Daniel blinked. The question surprised him, because, honestly, he had forgotten about that. Several months earlier, he changed reservations, looking for better prices, better locations, better reviews, normal travel planning. Nothing unusual. Millions of tourists do the same thing. But suddenly, it seemed important, very important. The officer listened carefully, then continued reviewing information. More silence followed. And honestly, Daniel felt his stomach tightening. The real problem started later. The officer discovered messages discussing temporary accommodation. Nothing illegal, nothing secret, nothing criminal, just ordinary conversations with friends. But immigration officers sometimes examine context, not just individual messages. Context matters, purpose matters, intentions matter, everything matters. Daniel suddenly understood something. Immigration interviews are not only about documents, they are about credibility, trust, consistency. The ability to demonstrate that your travel purpose matches your explanation. And that realization terrified him. The officer continued asking questions, carefully, methodically, professionally. Every answer created another question. Every explanation led somewhere new. The process felt endless. Daniel's confidence slowly disappeared. Not because he was dishonest, because he felt trapped inside uncertainty. And uncertainty creates fear. The officer eventually left the room, taking the phone, taking the passport, taking the documents. Daniel remained alone, waiting. Again. The waiting felt worse this time, much worse, because now he knew something serious was happening. Otherwise, they would not continue asking questions. Otherwise, they would not continue reviewing information. Otherwise, he would already be outside, enjoying his vacation. Instead, he sat alone inside an airport interview room, wondering whether his trip was about to end. Most travelers imagine international travel as freedom, adventure, excitement, exploration. But border control operates differently. Its purpose is verification, security, assessment, protection. And sometimes that process becomes uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. Daniel checked the clock repeatedly. Time moved slowly, painfully slowly. Every minute felt longer than the last. His family expected updates. Friends expected arrival photos. Nobody knew what was happening. And honestly, Daniel felt isolated, completely isolated. Eventually, the officer returned, along with another officer. That immediately increased Daniel's anxiety, because honestly, 2 officers felt more serious than one. The second officer sat quietly, observing, listening, reviewing notes. The atmosphere changed instantly. Questions resumed, this time more detailed. Travel history, employment history, previous international trips, financial resources, accommodation plans, everything. Daniel answered carefully, truthfully, directly. Still, the interview continued, and continued, and continued. Then came another surprise. The officers asked about social media. Daniel was shocked, not because he had anything to hide, because he never expected the subject to appear. Most travelers don't. Social media feels personal, private, separate from travel. Yet sometimes it becomes relevant, especially when officers are trying to understand a traveler's intentions. The officers asked about travel plans discussed online, photos, posts, comments. Everything seemed connected. Everything seemed relevant, and honestly, Daniel felt overwhelmed. The process had become far more complicated than he ever imagined. Most travelers never realize how important consistency is. Your application, your statements, your reservations, your travel plans. Everything should tell the same story. When inconsistencies appear, questions appear, and questions create delays. Delays create scrutiny, and scrutiny creates stress. The officers eventually left again, taking notes, reviewing information, discussing something privately. Daniel could not hear them, could not see their screens, could not know what they were thinking. That uncertainty became exhausting. His mind imagined worst-case scenarios: entry denied, return flight, lost money, canceled reservations, embarrassing conversations with family. Everything seemed possible, and honestly, that possibility felt terrifying. Hours passed, not minutes, hours. The airport outside continued operating normally. Flights arrived, flights departed, passengers entered America, passengers started vacations, life continued. But Daniel remained inside the interview room, waiting, wondering, worrying. Most travelers underestimate the emotional pressure of border inspections because they never expect to experience them personally, until one day, they do. The officers eventually returned once again. Their expressions remained impossible to read: professional, neutral, controlled. Daniel searched their faces for clues. There were none, not a single clue. Then the senior officer sat down, opened a file, looked directly at Daniel, and spoke slowly. What happened next would determine the future of his trip, and possibly much more. Because the decision was finally approaching, the waiting was almost over. But whether that would be good news or bad news, Daniel still did not know. His hands felt cold, his heart raced. The room felt silent, and honestly, the outcome could change everything. Part 3. The senior officer sat down slowly. The file remained open on the desk. Several pages rested inside. Daniel could see notes, highlighted sections, printed records, and honestly, his anxiety reached its highest point. The waiting was finally over. Now came the decision, the moment that would determine whether his dream vacation continued or ended immediately. The officer looked directly at him, calm, professional, serious. The room became silent, completely silent. Even the sounds from outside seemed distant. Daniel focused on every word, every movement, every expression. The officer began speaking. "Mr. Daniel, thank you for your cooperation." The sentence sounded neutral, neither positive nor negative, which made the uncertainty even worse. Then another sentence followed. "We needed additional clarification regarding your travel plans." Daniel nodded quietly. His heartbeat continued increasing. The officer continued. "We have reviewed your documents, travel history, reservations, and information provided during this interview. Every word felt important. Every word felt heavy. And honestly, Daniel felt unable to breathe normally. Then came a pause. A long pause. The officer looked at the file again, then finally delivered the answer. The answer Daniel had been waiting hours to hear. His admission would be approved. For a moment, Daniel thought he misunderstood. The stress had been so intense. The uncertainty had been so overwhelming. That good news felt almost unreal. He blinked, looked at the officer, and honestly, he needed a few seconds to process what had happened. The officer returned his passport, then returned his phone. The nightmare appeared finished. At least that was what Daniel believed. But the real lesson started later. Because the story was never about the phone. The story was never about one interview. The story was about preparation, awareness, understanding, and the reality many travelers never consider. Most tourists assume airport arrival is simple: land, pass immigration, collect luggage, start vacation. Sometimes that happens, many times it does. But sometimes additional questions appear. Sometimes additional checks happen. Sometimes travelers enter secondary inspection. And honestly, many people have no idea how to handle those situations. Daniel eventually left the inspection area. The airport looked exactly the same. Travelers moved everywhere. Families reunited. Taxi drivers waited. Tourists smiled. Everything appeared normal. Yet Daniel felt different. Very different. A few hours earlier, he viewed travel through excitement. Now he viewed travel through awareness. Because one airport experience taught him lessons years of planning never could. Most travelers focus heavily on flights, hotels, restaurants, tourist attractions, but very few focus on credibility, consistency, documentation, preparation. Those things become extremely important during international travel, especially when entering another country. Daniel eventually reached his hotel. The room looked beautiful. The city looked exciting. The vacation continued. But honestly, the airport experience remained in his mind. For days, for weeks, even months later. Because fear leaves strong memories, especially when travel is involved. Many viewers watching this story may wonder something important. Can border officers really ask questions about phones? Can additional screening happen? Can travelers be questioned for hours? The answer depends on the country, the situation, the circumstances, and applicable laws. Different countries operate differently. Different border agencies operate differently. Different situations produce different outcomes. That is why preparation matters. Not assumptions, not rumors, not social media opinions. Preparation. Daniel eventually researched immigration procedures extensively. The information surprised him. Thousands of travelers experience secondary inspections every year. Many are admitted. Some face delays. Others encounter additional reviews. Most are not criminals. Most are not dangerous. Most are simply travelers selected for additional verification. And honestly, that reality is rarely discussed publicly. People post vacation photos. People post travel videos. People post restaurant reviews. Nobody posts airport interviews. Nobody posts stressful inspections. Nobody posts hours spent answering questions. Yet those experiences exist, and travelers should understand that. Awareness reduces panic. Preparation reduces mistakes. Knowledge reduces fear. Those lessons matter, especially for first-time travelers. Daniel also learned another important lesson. Digital information matters. Travel plans matter. Consistency matters. When travel documents tell one story and other information tells another, questions appear. That does not automatically create problems, but it creates attention. And attention creates scrutiny. Most travelers never realize how quickly small inconsistencies become significant. Different hotel reservations, confusing travel plans, contradictory explanations. Everything matters, especially during interviews. The financial side matters too. Imagine if Daniel had been denied entry. Flights, hotels, transportation, activities, insurance complications. Everything would have created financial consequences. Thousands of dollars could disappear instantly. That reality surprises many tourists, because they assume approval guarantees certainty. Travel rarely offers guarantees. Preparation improves outcomes, but preparation never eliminates risk completely. That is simply reality. Daniel eventually completed his vacation successfully. New York, Boston, Washington, everything he planned, everything he dreamed about. The trip became memorable, positive, enjoyable. Yet one memory remained stronger than expected: the airport interview. Because that experience changed how he viewed international travel forever. Today, Daniel approaches every trip differently. More research, more preparation, more organization, more awareness. Because experience taught him something valuable. Confidence should come from preparation, not assumptions. Most travelers worry about the wrong things: lost luggage, flight delays, bad weather. Those issues matter, but documentation matters more. Travel plans matter more. Understanding entry requirements matters more. And honestly, many travelers only discover that reality when standing in front of an immigration officer. By then, options become limited. That is why smart travelers prepare early. Verify documents, review travel plans, understand entry requirements, carry supporting information, know where you are staying, know why you are traveling, know how to explain your plans clearly. Simple steps, but powerful steps. The difference between stress and confidence often comes down to preparation. Many travel problems are preventable. Not all, but many. Daniel's story is not about fear, it is about awareness. Because awareness creates better travelers, better decisions, better preparation, and ultimately, better experiences. Before your next international trip, ask yourself one important question. If an immigration officer asked detailed questions about my travel plans today, could I answer confidently? Because that confidence does not come from luck. It comes from preparation. And preparation remains one of the most valuable travel tools you can ever have. Travel should create memories, not panic, not confusion, not uncertainty. That is why education matters. That is why awareness matters. And that is why stories like this deserve attention. Because one unexpected question can teach lessons that last a lifetime. Travel preparation checklist. Always verify your passport validity. Always understand visa or entry requirements. Always keep hotel reservations accessible. Always know your travel itinerary. Always carry proof of return travel when required. Always understand your travel insurance coverage. Always keep emergency contact information available. Always answer questions honestly and clearly. And most importantly, never assume. Verify. Prepare. Travel smart. Disclaimer: this story is presented for educational and travel awareness purposes only. Border procedures, inspection policies, immigration laws, and traveler rights vary by country, airport, and individual circumstances. Travelers should always consult official government sources and comply with applicable laws and regulations before traveling. Subscribe to Global Policy Guide for travel safety, visa updates, insurance awareness, and real travel risk stories.